Hello everyone, my name is Michael McCann, and welcome to this Wayward Art Company tutorial on texture painting in Blender. Most of the focus will be on hand painting tileable textures that can be applied to your models. I'll be demonstrating how to paint these textures in just a few easy steps, and I promise if you have no experience at all painting, this will still be a lot of fun and probably much easier than you think. I modeled this medieval cartoon-style house to use as an example because of its variety of different kinds of textures that we can apply to it, from stone to wood and probably some tiles for the roof. Just a really good variety of different kinds of textures that we can create. Here I'm assigning different materials to my mesh so that later the textures that I create can be applied to them. So the idea is that we're going to make these tileable textures and then apply them to the materials and then bake all of them out into one big texture, which we can then paint the fine detail onto. So as you can see, I've already UV unwrapped this. So we're going to need to create another UV map. Because we'll probably unwrap those different materials in different ways. I think that cube projection will be fine for some of it, but the wood I think will need some more complicated unwrapping, and the roof probably just a simple unwrap. Change the view in the UV image editor from view to paint, and now I'm going to create a new image. I'm going to leave the size at 1024. And this is going to be the stone texture. I'm going to start by using the fill tool, and I'm going to fill the texture with a gray color. I find that when painting realistic textures, dark colors are better. They look a little more realistic. But when painting cartoon style textures, I suppose depending on the model, lighter textures just look a little better. Now I'll switch to my draw brush. And basically, I'm just going to start drawing in the blocks of stone. But in order for this texture to be tileable, you need to check wrap. And what this does is if I start drawing, it continues on the other side. And so basically that's how you create the tileable texture. I'm going to adjust the size of my brush. I think 16 looks good. And I'm going to use a color that's just a few shades lighter than the background. So I'm just going to start drawing in the blocks of stone. And I'm not going to worry too much about the shape or the size. It's stone after all, so it can be a little, it can have a little more variation than, say, brick, which is typically, each block is basically the same size and shape. With this, I feel like I have a little more freedom to add some variation to it. Plus, it's cartoon stone on top of that, so it doesn't really need to be perfectly symmetrical. The only time I really make these tileable textures are in the instance that I'm painting something really big, like a house, for instance, like we are in this example. And, it would obviously take a really long time to paint each individual stone on something like that. So this is just a big time saver. Otherwise, typically I like just painting right on UVs or on the model. But in an instance like this, you really can save a lot of time just making tileable textures and then adding the details by hand later. Okay, so we're about halfway there. There's going to be 4 rows of stone. So the idea now is to add a little more color because currently we only have 2 colors, gray and light gray. So I'm just going to turn the strength of my brush down, and I'm going to add some brown, and I'm just going to lightly brush it across each face. just to add a little extra color in. Okay, now I'll choose another color. Be like a dark green. I tend to think about how, real world objects would be affected. And, when I think of a stone wall, I think it being, you know, covered in maybe a little bit of dirt and maybe affected by nature, adding some, moss to it. I don't think that that actually applies in, in cartoon logic. I don't know that it's so important, but, um, it's just the way my brain works, I guess, when I'm painting. But so now I'm adding a little bit of light blue just for some more color variation. And so now I'm going to use my smear brush and I'm just going to blend all of that color together. The strength can't be too high because when it is, you actually kind of drag the color around. But if it's low enough, it just sort of blends all of the colors together nicely. I'm not going to be going into a lot of detail in these textures because I feel like it can be a little overwhelming for people who are just learning how to paint. I just want to show you the basics of how to paint a texture so that it looks three-dimensional. Just remembered I need to select wrap under image paint for this brush as well. I don't know that it'll make that much of a difference with the smear brush, but I suppose it could leave a little bit of a line where it's being blended from one side of the tile to the next. Okay, now I'm going to switch back to my paintbrush and select a lighter color. And I want my strength to be very low. And basically I'm just going to paint over the surface of each stone face. That's maybe a little too light, so I'll increase the strength a little. The idea is to paint over the surface of each face, but you still want all of that color that you just added before to show through. So this has to significantly brighten the stone face, but also be transparent, if that makes any sense. It probably doesn't look like much now, but that's typically how painting goes, really. You do the first few steps and it doesn't really look like anything, and then you just do that next step and it all sort of brings it together. I guess it's just, the process of painting, adding layers. Okay, so that's finished. I think I'm ready now to start making this look like it's a 3D texture instead of this flat 2D image. So to do that, I'm going to select a darker brush, and I'm just going to drag it along the bottom of each stone face, pretty much just following the same curve shape of each face. And even though the edges look a little blunt and they sort of stop abruptly, that's okay because I'm going to go back with my smear brush and sort of blend that in once it's all finished. Okay, so this dark line is supposed to represent the bottom of each stone block. So now I'm going to select a lighter color and I'm going to lower the strength. And I'm going to add some highlights at the top of each block to represent, light being, shown down on top of of each individual block. And it's these two lines, the light on top and the dark on the bottom, which will make your texture look three-dimensional. Okay, so now I'm going to take my blur brush and I'm just going to start pulling some of this color up around these edges that look a little too rounded. And you can use it to fix some of these little weird trouble areas. Earlier I mentioned that when the strength's higher, you can actually pull color instead of just blend it together, and that's what you're kind of doing here, is just sort of pulling the color up to soften it up, and any areas that are too light, you can drag some of that dark color into. Okay, so you could call that done, but I think that the faces, the front of each stone block, looks a little flat. So I'm just going to take a darker color and a really low strength and just kind of drag it in sort of a zigzaggy pattern across each stone face, and that's going to sort of give it the illusion that there is depth to the face, and that some areas are higher than others, and so light would affect it differently. Some other small detail that you could do is just by having a really dark brush and taking the radius on your brush down quite a bit too, so that you can create these tiny little craters in the face of the stone, just little chips or indentations. So I'll just do a couple. So now you would want to lighten your brush up and take the strength down and just paint some highlights on the edge of those little chips. And you can even do this on some of these areas where that dark color is shining through. You can paint highlights on it to make it look like there's more depth there. And the last little bit of detail that you could add that's really easy to do is take a light brush and just basically outline the front stone face. And this will sort of look like edge scratches. And if you want to, you could even drag some down to sort of outline how jagged the bottom and the sides of the block are. But this is something that you have to have sort of an understanding of perspective. So if you're not really used to painting, this might be something that's kind of hard for you. It's certainly hard for me at times still. But you start to understand it a little more once you've been painting for a while. But you could just get a lot of detail just from outlining that front face. I think the edge scratches look pretty cool on it. Okay, so now I'm just going to save this texture to my desktop. And I'm going to go ahead and apply it to the model just to see how it looks. If I don't like it, I can always make changes to it. So once you've applied it, you just need to adjust the mapping until you get a size that you like. And that looks pretty good. So now we can start painting the wood texture. And this one is considerably easier than the stone texture, I think. It certainly takes less time. So I'll use the fill tool and I'll select sort of a light brown color. I try to avoid like deep browns and go for more of like a khaki or a goldish brown. Something like that will do. So I'll go back to my paintbrush. And I'm going to set the paint stroke from space to line. And use a pretty small size brush. And I'll use the S key to color pick and then just darken this up a little. So we're going to paint the cracks, sort of the line between each plank of wood. So what I'm doing, because I can't really draw a straight line with the line tool, I'm just making these little marks so that it sort of acts as a guide so that I can match the top up with the bottom. So now all I have to do is just drag, from one dot to the next, and I know that I have it lined up. If this weren't a tileable texture, it wouldn't matter so much, but you get some really crazy. I'll just show you as an example. If you just kind of guess, then you get these, crazy lines. And then, of course, it's important to put one on the edge, too, because, again, it's tileable, so those two planks will be together. Now I'm going to lighten this up a little bit, take the strength way down, and take the radius up a little, because I don't want these wood planks to be too flat. I want there to be a little bit of roundness to the top. And if there was roundness to the top, there would be a little bit of a cast shadow that would sort of follow along each wood plank, each crack between the planks. So this just gives it a little more depth. So now I think I can start painting in some of the wood grain. So I'll lighten up the color and maybe add a little bit of a reddish brown to it. And I'm going to change the stroke back from line back to space. I want these lines to be fairly dark. Okay. That looks a little better. So again, this is one of those things where, this step just looks horrible, but then, you go back over the next step and it fixes it. It'll look really cool. But so you don't have to worry too much about where you're putting these lines. Just try to make each plank a little different. Just try to curve the lines. But not letting them get too close to one another at the same time. Now I'm just going back over some of the areas to darken them so that, darker means, sort of deeper, basically. So some of the lines will look like they have a little more depth than others. So now I'll change my brush to the smear brush and increase the radius. I want it to be a little bigger than the line itself. And I'm going to take the strength up too. And now basically all you want to do is just drag down the entire length of the line, and when you get to the end, you can just pull it really any direction that you want. and it sort of smooths it out and makes it look more like wood grain or cracks in the wood. The darker the line, the easier it is to drag that color through, which is why I was searching for a darker brown initially. And you could even, do some, like, if I wanted to create a wood knot, I could just, sort of bend the edge around. You can drag that color pretty far, in fact, so, I'll probably make a few of those wood knots. Okay, so we're almost done. I think that the line dividing each of the planks looks a little too crisp, so I lowered the strength on the smear brush, and I'm just going to soften up that line and the shadows around it. So now I've lightened up my brush, and I'm just going to paint in between all of the dark lines to add some highlights and make it appear as though some areas are raised higher than others. Again, I'm doing this with a really low strength, and for me, I'm using a tablet. So with a tablet, there's touch sensitivity or pressure sensitivity, which is really awesome. It's really made painting a lot more fun. But before I got this, actually, my girlfriend bought this for me maybe a year ago. Before I had it, I actually got really good at painting with a mouse, and in fact, it was really difficult for me to switch over to the tablet. Um, so, while it's an advantage, you can really do all of the same stuff with a mouse. Maybe takes a little longer though. Okay, so the only thing I would suggest doing at this point is maybe adding a little color variation. So I would take the strength way down and maybe add some orange. I think might look pretty good. And really, the strength should be very low. I mean, you would hardly want to see it, but it's for me, it's something that you don't notice until it isn't there. Like just those little soft touches of different color. So maybe I'll put a little bit of a darker brown in. You could even add maybe some light hints of green or even yellow, but I'm not going to do too much. So now I'm going to save that texture again to my desktop. And now apply them to that material. So after it's unwrapped, it's just a matter of adjusting and scaling the UVs in the UV image editor, because now they look pretty terrible. So any faces that need to be rotated, just rotate them and scale them. Also, scaling some of them down will help to keep the planks from looking too uniform in size. Now we're going to create the third and final texture, which is going to be the roof tiles. I'll start this the same way that I did the other two, by using the fill tool. And I'll select maybe a deep red or a brownish red color. Now go back to my texture brush, switch the stroke back to line, and this is going to be a dark line, and it's going to be very thin. So basically I'll be doing this the opposite way that I did the stone, because with the stone I created the background first, or the grout of the stone, and then colored in the blocks. This time I've already laid out the color of the tile, and now I'm just drawing in the spaces in between those tiles. So it's a little backwards, but it's essentially the same idea. It's going to be 4 rows of tiles, and each row will be a little offset. So just use the line tool to space out those tiles. I'm sorry if you can hear the noise, the traffic. I'm actually in Arizona right now, and my air conditioning broke. So I turned off all the fans so that I could record this without a lot of noise, but by opening a window, the traffic is it's driving me crazy. So I'm sorry if it's coming through. Plus it's like 1,000,000 degrees in here right now. It's like a sweatshop. So, you know, I should maybe look into buying some kind of a filter to filter out, like background noise. Okay, so again, our image looks really flat. So what we want to do is create a ridge on the bottom of each of these tiles so that it looks like each layer is overlapping the next. So I'm going to increase the radius and lower the strength. And that's maybe a little too dark. So what I might do actually is, I'm going to color pick with S, and then just darken this up a little and maybe lower the strength again. Okay, yeah, it looks a little better. So again, this is representing the bottom of each tile. Okay, so now I need to create a cast shadow underneath of each row, because again, each row is overlapping the next. So it would cast, if, assuming that light was coming from straight down, it would cast a shadow horizontally. So I just increased the radius a little and lowered the strength. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So I'm doing this just underneath of where the bottom ridge is of each row of tiles. This one will be down at the bottom, but it'll actually show up at the top. So. Okay, so now I'm going to add a little bit of random color. So I'll color pick again and just darken it up. Oh, I need to change the stroke method from line back to space. And I'm just going to really lightly brush over some darker color in. Again, it's just so that those large faces, those large tiles don't look so flat. Okay, and now I'm just going to soften up those vertical lines. Okay, now with my strength all the way up on that smear brush, I'm just going to add these little chips and ridges by dragging the dark line up into the light part of the tile. And really the real way to do this, again, this is the thing with perspective, you would want to come out, and then right where that ridge is, you would want to pull it up towards the middle. Again, having an understanding of perspective is something that you need to study or just get a grasp on. As you paint more and more, it's something that you just get a sense of. But just these little straight lines will do in adding the effect of the like cedar tiles. Okay, next I'm just taking a little lighter color and I'm adding some highlights on each one of those cracks. Something that makes it just stand out a little more. Okay, now I'm going to save this texture. And apply it to the model. Now I'm ready to bake all of these textures out to one map. So I'm going to select the first UV map, that one that I had unwrapped everything onto one texture. But I need to make sure that the camera or render button is still applied to the second one that I created, so that all of those textures are mapped out properly. So create a new texture. And I'm going to multiply its size by 4 so that it's a big texture. And now I'll bake just the textures. Okay, I'll save that. Now I'll click on this other camera icon so that it renders this new UV map. And I'll create a new material and I'll apply that texture to it. And as I stated earlier in the tutorial, the focus is just going to be on how to paint those tileable textures and apply them to a model. For just people who are getting started in texture painting. So I'm not going to go into how to paint a lot of fine detail, but when you get to this point, basically you just want to make some tea or some coffee or have a glass of wine and put your earphones in, because you can spend hours or even days working on this kind of detail, depending on how complicated or detailed you want your model. Okay, so I'm going to just call this done. I could have spent hours more on it doing, little fine detail, but I always like to throw in a game engine tip somewhere if I can. for those of you who are interested. So say you wanted like a freestyle line around this that works dynamically. You can Shift D to duplicate your model, and then Alt S to scale it out slightly. Now give it a new material and make it black. And you might as well make it shadeless. And now flip the direction of those normals. And now you have a cool freestyle line, which sort of gives it like a cell shaded effect. It of course doubles your polygon count, but with low poly models, it shouldn't matter too much. And so here's what it looks like in the game engine. One last thing that you can do is I've already baked out an ambient occlusion map. So you need to set this for multiply. And then I'm going to take the color under diffuse influence up past the default all the way up to 2. And that gives it more of a cartoon style shadow or ambient occlusion. So that's the end of this thing. I hope you guys enjoyed it and that you learned something. And if you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.